is partner in licensing law and an expert in gambling law, I believe, at TLT Solicitors in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And we thought we'd bring her on today. We've heard a lot from operators and from specialists in the hospitality industry over the last couple of months, but none from, no specialists as such in the licensed trade. So we wanted to just hear her thoughts on where the trade sits at the moment, how it's been, and what she sees happening in the future. So, Caroline, over to you. How is it going? What up in the hospitality industry or licensed trade industry in Scotland?
I think it's well. I was preparing and doing some notes for today or this afternoon, and I kept writing mixed bag because I think that's what we've got. I can't really find a trend or a particular rhyme or reason for some parts of the industry doing really well and some parts of the industry not so well. So I think, how have things been since really lockdown started moving forward and eased in July? Well, for me, the reopening of beer gardens was actually quite an emotional moment because we had closed everyone down, and then suddenly we're saying, actually, no, we can move ahead again. So the 6th of July was a really important date. It was a delayed date, which I'm sure everyone remembers. We thought it might be the 19th of June, but it was put back. I think up until that point, some premises have been able to keep the doors open by using off sales or doing click and collect or deliveries and changing business styles essentially to try and trade through in some capacity. We'd had throughout the summer a little bit of antisocial behaviour really coming from that sort of aspect. So the opening of beer gardens was not only important for the trade, it was important for me because I'd spent about 5 weeks talking about toilets and where people were going to the loo, because you had certain sectors of the community coming out and buying carry-outs or going to the local off-sales and buying and then going to sit in parks and gardens, etc., and then weeing in hedges. So toilets were a really big difficulty, and that was a key point for the 6th of July for me. And then we moved on from there, obviously, to the 15th of July for indoor premises. But really, as everyone on this call will know, the key points really that have been so important and remain so important was looking at what the guidance from the Scottish Government was and the risk assessments, looking at the health and hygiene measures and trying to keep on top of those. And that was actually really incredibly difficult in terms of what we were pushing for. And I've been part of the Scottish Government task force looking at hospitality guidance. Once we got the beer gardens open, that was part of the trade, but we still had the 2-metre rule, the distancing, which meant that a lot of premises, even you were saying, but you can have the beer garden, we're saying that's great, but I can't do 2 meters. It just doesn't give me the right capacity to keep it, economically viable in any way, shape, or form. So when that move essentially happened, and we moved with specific measures obviously in place, as we all know, from 2 meters to 1 meter, that was another night that we kind of cracked open a wine bottle and enjoyed ourselves, because actually that was a really, really big movement and moment. I think in terms of working with the government, never have I before sent an email to the First Minister with essentially 5 key points entitled, "This is what I need." I need a letter from the Chief Planning Officer talking about the 28-day rule and allowing awnings and things to go up in beer gardens, need a relaxation there. I need the city centres to be looked at and quick smart, because we've got tumbleweed going through them and it's absolutely disastrous for everybody. And sort of 3 other points. I wish I'd spell checked it before I sent it. I have to say that point, because when I reread it that night, my stomach just contracted thinking, oh, for goodness sake, like you're one moment in the sun and you couldn't even spell premises right. It was just, everything was going so fast. But to give her due, she listened. There was lots of other people on that particular call, but she listened and she did. And we started getting the letter from the Chief Planning Officer, and then we had updated guidance to licensing boards and various bits and pieces. But I think from what's happened from July, I think it's been a slow start, and we've had a lot to do with regards to customer confidence, and again going back to the risk assessments and the measures. The weather was helpful to begin with, but then turned, so you had beer gardens that were quite busy and then being sort of rained out. Of course, I think the city centre situation is very, very tricky still. I've had reports from premises where you're in a local community or in a suburb or on the coast or in specific parts of Scotland, and actually, the footfall's been quite good, and there's been, you can trade out of it essentially. Some places are saying actually we're 100% in terms of where we were and where we wanted to be and comparable to last year. So that's very positive for those. But these are not the kind of main reports that we're getting. It is still a situation that is very tricky for folk. I had some time out just to take the kids away essentially and get them out with the four walls of this house. And we booked self-catering accommodation, we had an Airbnb, we had a hotel, we had various bits and pieces just to sort of test and see how things were going. I think self-catering seems to be really successful with people wanting their own space and to manage that space. Hotels are still seeing difficulties, and I think because we're now coming out of Scottish school holidays, we're seeing a dip again in terms of what people are doing, and I don't think the autumn figures are looking particularly positive quite yet. So again, you're looking at, well, what's the demand? What are the issues? And I think people are just still question marking, just like you said, Alex, you know, is it this November or is it November 2024? We're still so unsure. And with the local lockdowns, okay, they need to happen, but it does create this question, you know, are we going to be able to do that? And then once we've booked, people struggled with getting money back from, I'm talking about more sort of foreign holidays and things like that, but that was a tricky process for everybody. And do you want to put yourself back in that? It's a very difficult one. I've heard and seen lots of positivity about the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, and many premises are seeking or want to continue that. But it comes back to the whole point really is you can be totally jam-packed with people, well, at risk assessed, you know, aside, and capacities all adhered to, etc., and one-way systems. But if you've not got the revenue coming in, if you're discounting, then what is the point? And I think some people have done well with the social media aspect and building a picture of a successful building with successful premises, lots of people coming in, but you don't know what's behind that. You know, is there discounting going on? All that sort of revenue piece, which is very important. If the revenue's not there, then I'm worried again, as we mentioned just in our conversation about the long-term impacts. Now, we were talking about it in terms of us and the physical impacts, but for these buildings, there's been no investment this year. You know, the maintenance perhaps hasn't been dealt with. Nobody's been there to cut the grass. Everyone's been furloughed or whatever it might be. So there were real kind of practical issues. And going back to the main question, really, sort of how are things going? Well, they were difficult to start with, and they've got better. But I feel that we're going backwards again with that. And legally, we're seeing real difficulties, such as, you know, the music ban that came in 2 weeks ago. That's been very difficult. No volume on the telly and no background. Some say music, some say noise. I'm sticking with music so that we can have a bit of hubbub.
It's true, yeah.
It's yeah. And I think the most recent regulations, which came out at 4 p.m. last Thursday, due to be in force on Friday of last week. So that those allow a local authority to issue a direction, which they could pass to they would pass to their environmental health officer in the main, or a constable, that could close a premises that was seen to be not assisting in stopping the virus spreading, essentially, and the word spreading is used there. So that, again, very draconian in terms of how it's been drafted. And it's come out of the Scottish Government with absolutely no appeal provision at all, and essentially could close a premises within 21 days. So that, again, seems just madness, really. Again, I picked up on that in my call with the government today to say it's very unusual for us to have regulation come out like this, which has got no weight of challenge. So that is going to be looked at. So the trade have had, you know, the virus itself, how to reopen in the best possible way if at all it can, how to encourage the customer base to come back in, then how to keep it trading when it rains, and etc., etc. And now it's got a raft of new things to be worried about. And that is very tricky. It continues to be very tricky. And I'm not sure there's a full understanding at ministerial level as to what that kind of means and the impact of it. So it's been a tricky time. I'm sorry. I'll just keep going. I mean,
no, absolutely. No, I was just going to ask about the government. How are they responding to your, you know, when you go back and question them? How are they actually responding to that? Are they just saying, "Well, we'll deal with it. We'll monitor it," or because it's got to be quicker than that, surely? I mean, these businesses are going to go under very quickly if they're not listened to.
So on the music situation, we've been in gathering evidence. So that the government had evidence to say that people singing and having to lean in closer to each other because of background music or raise their voices increase the droplets essentially in the air, increase the spread of a virus potentially, so that's why what happened. The other side to that is that if you take all sound away, people move in anyway because they want to preserve their privacy. You have people laughing if they're having a good time. Does that not spread droplets? You know, there's lots of other ways of looking at it. So the government went back and instructed a core expert group on noise and transference and all that sort of thing, because there's a huge amount of difference between noise in my kitchen here. If I had the bass up, you know, we couldn't probably have a conversation, Alex, but if we're in a large premises with high ceilings and the doors are open and, you know, it's just the two of us, then we probably could. So there's lots of ways that the trade could mitigate against, and again, risk assess how they use noise. The government haven't been keen to come in and say, you know, it's 60 decibels only, because they feel that there's so much movement there and people will rush out and buy Amazon sort of decibel readers, etc., and it will all be very subjective and difficult. So there's a move to give the power back to those that want to have it, to risk assess it and move it forward. And hopefully, you know, within the next 2 weeks, we'll see movement on that. But premises have reported 50% trading losses as a result of this.
Yeah.
And there's simply no atmosphere after 9 o'clock.
It's like they're outlawing atmosphere. That was just what I was going to say. It's like that, you know, it's like if anyone's ever been to the Standing Order in George Street, I don't want to rubbish particular institution, but it's almost, because there's no music, it's actually the only pub I've ever been to where there is no music at all times, pre-COVID-19. And you can listen to the person you're speaking to, but you can also listen to everybody else, whether you want to or not. And it's a really strange atmosphere to go in. It's almost like they're closing and you've got to leave. You know, it's lights out, it's last orders kind of thing. It's a very strange situation, and it will ultimately change the characteristics of every pub and every bar and hotel and restaurant. On the one hand, you might not get elevator music, I suppose, when you're in the big hotels singing. So every cloud, I suppose. But the licensing boards themselves, sorry.
No, it's been interesting to see the impact though, because you had the article from James Thompson, Press and Field, and so it's everybody is impacted by this in a negative way. Unfortunately, during the discussion, again, this is just for the people on this Zoom call, an environmental health officer was on the call, and he did compare everywhere to Wetherspoons. He said, Wetherspoons do this de facto, so literally I don't know where the problem is. And luckily it wasn't me that had to sort of take him down from that particular position. But I thought, for goodness sake, if this is the government advisor saying, oh, well, Wetherspoons do it, so what's the fuss about?
Yes.
Well, you know, what possible? So it's been a question, to go back to your question, original question, it's been a question of putting evidence to the government to say, look, here's the other side to this, here's the other argument, and they have been listening and they have been moving on it. They've been, honestly, it's the first time I've ever had a sort of direct link in, as I say, to the First Minister to say, here are the problems. And with that, unfortunately, one of the problems was Edinburgh as a council, because I've had real difficulties getting information from them, and I know that leads on probably to the next part of the discussion, but to say, look, to have George Street sitting as it is when so much more could be done to try and entice people back to the city centre, same for Glasgow, same for Aberdeen, we could do this really well, which has unlocked some doors, but it's been super to be able to have that. We've been very lucky with the civil servant that we're working with. He is very proactive, and for example, with the regulations that have no appeal provisions, there'll be a call later this week in which we'll be invited to draft those. So it's not my position particularly to draft Scottish Government legislation, but I'll give it a good shot if that's what's required. And I've been very scathing about the fact that these came out on a Friday with such a big gap in them, legal gap, but it must have been political pressure that was at force that afternoon or on Thursday. So that kind of thing happens. They'll say, right, okay, if you've got a problem, tell us how to fix it. Tell us what you want to happen and we'll see what we can do. And that, it has been an open dialogue all the way along. It's been an open dialogue. And that dialogue started at the very beginning saying, okay, if it doesn't say the word off sales on a premises license, please can we have something that says that doesn't matter? Please can we have an understanding that deliveries will be made so that those that can trade and support a local community can be allowed to do that, even if the premises license doesn't have it on the face of it. And we will fix the license when it comes to pass, when we can do that by lodging a major variation or whatever that will be. And so that statute runs out on the 30th of September. So we've just asked today for that to be renewed, essentially, because that also dealt with beer gardens and occasional licenses and things. So we've pushed for that to be renewed for another 4-month period, just to get us past that. At the beginning, and again, coming on to what I think might be your next question, Alex, was about licensing boards. And unfortunately, we met a few kind of very black letter lawyers who said, clerks to licensing boards who said, no, the Licensing Act is the Licensing Act, and I'm going to only stick with that. And it's been super to say, actually, there's an act that here says that you can add in off sales. And then we had an updated version of the Section 142 government guidance, which is guidance to licensing boards, and had the words pragmatic and business focused in it. So that's the first time, again, that was a result of a direct call to say we need help in opening up the licensing boards and allowing them to act in the way that we want them to act. On
a local level, on a more local level, is that?
On a local level, exactly. So you had the clerk in Glasgow bending over backwards and putting occasional licenses through within sort of 24 hours. And then you had other clerks saying, no, I can't take any applications at all. So you had a real mixed bag of how people were behaving, and I still have that mixed bag as to who's going to process even an application. So anything we put at the moment is on one desk, it's just getting bigger and bigger in a pile, and they're only dealing with emergency applications, of which there are less now because it's a bit more organised. But at the beginning it was a question of definitely saying to people, you can do this, and I don't need a Zoom chat or an MS Teams about it. I just need you to do it quickly and get it up on your website, get it down, and then granted. We have always had really good working relationships with licensing standards and environmental health officers, the police, etc. And that has been really, really important during this period, being able to lift the phone and say, are you happy with whatever we're proposing and going forward? But immediately when the pubs closed, that was a tragedy and so difficult. But all of the suppliers to those, so the wholesalers, the distilleries, their routes to market instantly were cut. So we went to them and said, right, okay, you can have the general public into you, keeping within all social distancing, and we licensed them directly. Now, that has a business impact. They're cutting out the middleman. So in some cases, the business was saved from going under. We worked a lot with Scottish Food and Drink to just do it on a pro bono basis, to literally get people open to be allowed to sell. And that worked really well and created a huge amount of goodwill. There was real positivity about that. And just allowing people to be able to continue to trade was obviously so vitally important. But we needed the councils, the licensing board, buy into that. We needed
they needed to cooperate with that.
They did, and they needed to turn things around really quickly and speak to the convener of the licensing board who was signing the application, and all these things need to be backed up. When we were coming actually to do the outside areas, a lot of premises, it's maybe they have a small beer garden, so they never incorporated it within their premises license. So we would come in and do an occasional license for a specific area, and we did about 200 of them. And at the start, I was going with the 19th of June date, so we lodged them sort of a month in advance, 3 weeks in advance, and then just got the amount of, oh no, you haven't signed the application form, we can't start to process these because we don't know whether actually we're going to get to that in the phasing. There was no forward thinking. My other partner, Stephen, who you probably all know, he had Glasgow, and he gave me the rest of Scotland. So he had Glasgow with Mary Miller as the clerk, who turned them around within 24 hours and didn't put end dates on his occasional licenses. And I was away up having arguments with Moray and Falkirk and Fife because I had to travel. Find the right form. Like, it was ridiculous. But I mean, ultimately, it took a week or so, but people started going, okay, well, this is going to happen. There's lots of heads in the sand, and okay, well, working from home, it's really difficult. Yes, it is. We all find that, but ultimately, the end result is that we have places ready to trade when we can trade. So I go back to the 6th of July date. That was a very important sort of date for us in terms of progress. I felt that one particularly.
There must have been a huge amount of disappointment then when that was sort of stymied, kiboshed at the last minute, wasn't it? And it literally was at the last minute.
It was a Thursday, wasn't it? It was a Thursday before it was due to open.
And the amount of heartache that you could see pouring out of places and on social media from these operators who'd done everything they could just to get back out there. And then they were delayed another further 2 weeks.
It was another 2 weeks, and a client actually that night so she dropped me off. They were selling beer in milk jugs, so she dropped me off a milk jug of beer, actually for my husband, not for me. And
that's a cool client.
Pizza dough. She said, have it on us. You've had a bad day, and it was a bad day. We were all set up to go, and then to have the rug pulled like that was very unfortunate. There's been a few points of language used by the ministers that has been unfortunate, that we've been able to go back and say, please don't call us, whatever it might be. Please, think about your wording a bit more carefully. But I mean, overall, it has been, you have to take the positives, don't you? You have to find the positive in the situation and grow it. What a good point for me was having Nicola Sturgeon come to Cold Town House and sitting, okay, she only had a latte and I really wanted her to have a gin and tonic, but she had
several gin and tonics.
But that was good. They're really good points to say, she did what she said she was going to do, which was come to a beer garden, sit in it and have a drink. It was a hot coffee rather than anything else. Yeah,
sure. And I mean, she's coping with the situation, and is she a good conduit for you? I mean, are you finding, Nicola Sturgeon herself, because she's coming off quite positively in the sector in general, maybe not in the sector, but certainly in the country. But has she listened to you, or is it her ministers that are listening to you, or not, as the case is?
No, I think it's her that has listened, and certainly when we were pushing on the music point, with the senior civil servant said to us, the First Minister understands where you're coming from. She sees the detrimental impact and she understands the commercial reality. The difficulty is she has the science that's the other side. So give us the other side of that coin. Give us the evidence to be able to push it back and redress it. So that's what we're doing. So I think in terms of positivity, it has been a good experience with her. I do feel that there's been a good, ear to try and say, I need this fixed, and it has been fixed, which is quite remarkable. It really is. So I will give credit where it's certainly due, and I think having the daily updates and these things in the way that it's been handled has been very helpful as well. The Glasgow situation as opposed to the Aberdeen situation, difficult decisions to take, but again, Glasgow, a different scenario, so therefore she's limited households, kept it proportionate to where the source of the issue is, which was the house parties, essentially, and people going around. I think there's a huge piece to come, and which again I requested today, about the behaviour of patrons within premises, and I didn't really sort of intend to jump to this quite so early in the conversation, but I think how people behave and whether they acknowledge the what is the correct word? The stressors on the trade at the moment, in terms of sticking to risk assessments, in terms of not going in exit doors, and not
respecting what they've done.
Like, don't give your name, Nicola Sturgeon, and a false phone number for track and trace, because ultimately that is just a breakdown in it. But equally, a lady went out having had a COVID test, and she was asymptomatic, but she was connected to flatmate had a test and tested positive. So she went to the pub twice. She went to 2 different pubs and then a pizzeria, and then tested positive herself. And it's like that kind of thing. If you've had a COVID test, just don't come out. Just treat it like you actually have the virus, and be respectful of everybody else around it. So I think there's been a piece of work done on the confidence and getting people to come back out, and Nicola's been part of that. The SEIP was part of that, and there's more messaging to come. But I think the messaging has to remind people that it's not, the situation hasn't really fundamentally changed. There's still a virus out there, and we have to deal with it. And if people don't behave, we will have another, maybe not a national lockdown, but we'll see bars closing. And I am worried about Glasgow that next week, if the rates don't fall, it will be the hospitality that's shut, for no fault of their own. And that's really where I come to. And when we looked at the guidance, even on track and trace and other things, the first guidance draft came out, said that if somebody refused to give their details, then you had to refuse service. So this is not mandatory. There's no fine if somebody gives you the wrong information.
No.
There's no way to enforce this. again, you put all the pressure and the stress onto the trade, and that's just unfair. And I feel it's the same situation even now, that we're expected to make sure everyone behaves themselves, and that actually it's people coming into premises that need to take responsibility for that themselves.
It's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? I was in just a cafeteria the other day, and they asked me they've got an app, but I didn't have enough space on my phone to download it. So I had to literally write down my name and address and phone number on a slate almost with a feather, because I was so old fashioned. But I gave it to them, and I it crossed my mind. Other people have given false. Why would it? What would I possibly benefit from by giving the false information? I knew I didn't have COVID at that point, but I didn't know nobody else did in there.
Yeah.
So if somebody else did, I'd want to be contacted. But the mentality of some people out there is just it doesn't make any sense that they would give the wrong. But they just want to upset the system a bit. Can I bring Gary McLean in quickly? Gary, how are you feeling Glasgow is in the West Side? I know there's a couple of people on the call from Glasgow, but how are you finding things over there?
Again, I think it's a similar story. I've been out personally a couple of times, city centre, Monday night, a couple of weeks ago. I saw several places with queues at the back of 5. Witherspoons at the queue, Sugo.
People with earphones on, listening to their own music.
Yeah, so, and again, I went into a pub for a couple of pints with a couple of lads for college, and we went into the Horseshoe, and I mean, it was empty, but we still had to wait to get in until a table was clear. So I was impressed with the way everything was handled. I was impressed by social distance. I was impressed that everyone was taking it serious. But the town itself was quiet, so there was a few places busy. I mean, college is starting to get up and running. College has always been a sort of guiding light, I think, with all of this. And I think people now, there's certainly been a turn that people are just accepting from my sort of business side, people are just accepting the fact that everything is online. So, there's nothing getting planned for next year. That's the worry as well. These big events, food festivals, and a lot of the stuff that I've travelled to, the committees, and I'm on a few of those committees, are just not meeting. They're just, you're sitting with your finger in there wondering what's going to happen.
Losing the momentum, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the big fear that seems to be coming now. Things like Tartan Week in the States and all of that. They did a wee bit online stuff, but they just weren't. It was very close to where they were, and the danger is that if we lose these events for 2 years, where's the momentum to get them back? So it's a definite change in world, and I don't know where the momentum will come from, because a lot of the events I do, the day one of the day after the event's over, these events are starting to get planned. And things, even looking at our own trade, things like Christmas and all that, what are people doing? What are how are people planning Christmas? It's just I personally feel we're taking 2 steps forward and 3 back almost every couple of weeks. And a lot of my friends are just not opening. A lot of particularly city centre, there's quite a lot of big name restaurants that just haven't reopened, and through the grapevine are not reopening. I'm sure you all know certain groups and stuff like that are just not coming back. So it's a scary time, I think.
So I was going to say, just on that note, we got an email from a place on Skye. Now, there are not very many places in Scotland that are more popular than Skye for tourists, and the rural, everybody seems to say that the rural institutions, the rural establishments are doing a lot better than the city centre ones. And we got an email from them today saying, Alex, just want to let you know we're shutting down for the foreseeable future, because it's just not working. Now, whether that's because of space and social distancing didn't do them any favours, or whether it's just because not enough people are going to Skye, I don't know. I think it's the former. But they have no choice in the matter, and they're just going to have to shut, possibly for good, but they didn't want to say that. And when somewhere like that, when somewhere as popular as Skye has establishments that are doing that, then it's quite worrying. But it's the uncertainty, really, isn't it? From our own perspective, with the CIS awards.
I mean, some people are embracing it. I've got friends that have got a couple of bars in town, and they've got a bar in Partick, and they were obsessed by social distancing and dividing and temperature machines and everything else. And again, Partick's doing well. I think it's one of the places that's good. And I've got friends, I've got Suburban, Bishop Briggs, Lindsay, Bearsden, and he's very quietly saying, we're up on last year. So, there is a definite split to geographical locations. And again, we're seeing that everywhere from Manchester to London to Liverpool, Belfast, all of these places, that the city centres that normally do okay are basically knackered.
Exactly. Alistair, the hotel sector, rural, urban, how's it from your perspective?
Well, my experience is I've been out and about a bit, up the west coast, up north, Dumfries and Galloway. I think they're all, trade-wise, they're all quite happy with August and probably with September. I think what happens from now on will be, as has been said earlier, what's going to happen in October, November, December. Interesting, I just had a chap I'm trying to flog his hotel. He didn't go, just to give an example, he didn't go into the eat out scheme because Monday and Tuesday he didn't want to take on extra staff. He wanted to keep it lean and mean. And he's just reported today that his August figures without doing the scheme were more or less the same as August 19, which I think he saw as quite a positive, and he's probably made more money because they had fewer staff. In other words, he was working in the kitchen when he wouldn't normally have been working in the kitchen, which is interesting that happened as well. With all, but I think out in those areas, I remember one of the trip I did, it was Ballaghulish, Fort William and Pitlochry in a day, and Pitlochry was just absolutely jumping. And you wouldn't know there's any problem other than there's a few people walking around with masks on, but not that many.
Looking slightly eccentric.
Obviously, you went into the. I was only stopping to get fish and chips in Pitlochry. Obviously, you had to wear a mask then, but you're just the places you could see were very, very busy, and it varies. I think there's people like, he's quite open about it. Donna Castle's done extremely well. I think Donna, I think he said in his first Monday of the eat out, he did 200 lunches. Now you think first, that's brilliant. I think that's 200 people in Donna, extra people in Donna. And I asked him, what would you normally do? And he said 25. And he's doing 200. So he's done, his figures are way up. But city centres, I totally agree, are a disaster. And the hotel side, although I actually, before this meeting, I was having a coffee in the Roxburgh Hotel, or whatever it's called these days. And I was just asking how they get on. Their raise, which I thought was, well, it's fine, but maybe a bit extreme. They don't touch, if somebody stays in a room, they don't touch it for 2 days and then give it the deep clean and then leave it for a third day. So it's 3 days of a blank room after somebody's been there. So if you're in for one night, it's then blank for 3 nights. So it's they're working on 30% occupancy. Having said that, probably in Edinburgh, that's probably better than most if they're working 30%.
Unfortunately, they're not able to charge triple rates. It's the opposite of that.
I didn't realise that. I presume that's an IHG process. That'll be there. The rules coming from up the line. But I thought that was quite interesting and equally, dare I say, I thought quite extreme. But that's the way they want to deal with it and tick the box. They'll have their green tick and have all that there. That's fine. And but I didn't ask the question if they were having to turn away business. I suspect they're not. I suspect they're not.
No.
Because, as you know, there's plenty of hotels in Edinburgh that haven't opened up yet.
Yeah, and those that have are really suffering with their rates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know that I was down in Dumfriesshire, a village hotel, nice village hotel, but they've decided not to open at all until March, April, which I was quite surprised at. But I think there might be some other underlying family reasons for that, as well as the COVID-19 being the excuse for it all. But
is there much movement in the sales and
it's early doors? It's finger in the air. As you know, I've just started out in my new capacity, but we're getting the inquiries, getting at the level I think that I'm at. Then the properties I've just putting on the market, about to put on the market, but getting the inquiries, that's fine. Getting to the next stage is trickier, whether it be viewings and clearly there is the traditional banks are not lending. Got a couple of deals. I've got one exchanging on 9th of September, and another one at the end of the month, which at either end of the scale, well, my scale anyway, one at 1.2 million, one at 150,000. But
that's encouraging, given
the big one's a cash sale. The small one is actually 50% lending from a bank I've never heard of in my life, but they're good. Progressive banking from Manchester, if anybody's ever heard of it.
No.
So, and seems to be quite sort of normal. They're not charging 10% or anything like that. There's quite normal rates.
That's very progressive.
But it's there. So that's been done. That's 2 deals done in lockdown before I actually even joined GNS at the 1st of July.
That is really encouraging. I mean, it's not,
There's others. I think there's small things. Peter, my colleague, has got things running on various things, but leasehold stuff, there's that going on. But yeah, on the trade side, on the selling side of things. But I mean, interesting. Somebody was saying, when I'm about to say something that sounds as though I'm a man about town, going around all the pubs in Edinburgh. But I've been in a few restaurants, and the experiences have been varied. I mean, some were and nothing bad about any of them, but except one where. Last week I was in a restaurant on a Monday that was doing this eat out, and that was fine. They did everything properly. And then a restaurant in the same suburban area of Edinburgh on the Tuesday, and they weren't doing the eat out, which I was quite surprised at. But equally, the staff weren't wearing masks, and you think, oh, yeah. So you think that's not. You think they're just sort of bulldozing through it all. And then on Monday I was in a pub, the Roseburn Bar, just for a quick 5 o'clock beer. But then somebody else and you was in the bar, and he came down to sit beside us to have a chat, and quite rightly he was told by staff, you can't sit there, you're in that group over there, move on. Right. So I thought that was quite heartening that the staff are doing that. And to be fair, as a customer, as you say, oh Christ, you forget your automatic thing is just to sit down, and so it's quite heartening. They were moving people on in a polite way.
Yeah. So, Gary, can I ask you, what's it like you're in Aberdeen?
No, I'm down in Glasgow.
You're down in Glasgow, but you were in Aberdeen for a while, but you've still got contacts up there, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I haven't been in touch with the Aberdeen guys, apart from the lockdown, which obviously is devastated. The main thing in Aberdeen now is how to get the confidence back now, when they had the confidence coming in, and then of course they were locked down again. It's how to restart that confidence. And of course, as some of us who know Aberdeen, there's a lot of work going on from all the organisations to try and get that confidence back. But the feeling is it's going to take a lot longer than what they planned originally. I certainly agree with what Gary was saying about Glasgow, but I would say to mix back down here, because I've seen certainly the winners for me, the best disciplined people for social distancing for me are Millers and Carter, all bar one, very impressed with all bar one, turn people away. People come to that door and there's a queue to turn them away. I've been in there a couple of times. And they are very disciplined. However, talking to a local bar owner down here in Aberdeen, he's got properties in the 3 cities, and he's saying that the table service is something for yourself, Caroline. The table service, the fact that people don't go to the bar to order drinks, their sales are down 30%.
Right.
When you look at that, it's exactly what you think. They're not getting the shots. When people are waiting for the round, there's no shots being poured. There's not the quick half. There's not the quick gin and tonic.
It's the speed.
It's the speed. Whilst they're waiting at the bar, they're drinking something else whilst they're waiting. They're not getting that revenue. And he's also saying that the general sale of shots is just virtually non-existent.
That's interesting. It's the beer garden thing as well. We had a very rare night out on Saturday. We went to a local beer garden to sit out, and they were too busy to come and take repeat orders. So eventually I just said to my husband, get 2 pints rather than, and I'll have a larger glass of wine. That's the way we'll deal with this, because they just can't keep up. But we couldn't go in, and there's that natural reaction to go and fix the problem, and you can't. You've got to wait or catch an eye or whatever. But yes, exactly that. It's the speed, it's the turnover of things. But
those of us who know all bar one in Glasgow, I was in there last night, that all the tables that could be filled were filled, because they have tables that are not used, obviously, to keep the distance. Yeah. They had 4 floor staff and 2 bar staff, and you were waiting for service. So they cut back the staff. At the same time, they clearly having the problem getting the sales, and they're refusing people, because you see people come to the door and they're saying, I'm sorry, you haven't booked, or and if there's a queue, they send them away anyway. If there's, come back in 15 minutes is the general statement. I dined with Brian a couple of weeks ago, Brian Mole, and that was fabulous. I mean, the discipline, Carl came over and said, the whole, the toilet issue, that the whole thing was very, very well managed, which you would imagine from Brian. And again, we were in the booth seat, so you felt comfortable anyway, but fabulous experience.
Has it affected his capacity, Gary?
Yes, definitely. They opened up on the Tuesday night and the Wednesday for the eat out promotion. But of course, what they're finding is people are spending to get the discount. So they're spending little to get the maximum £10.
Oh, I see.
So they're not spending 40 quid to get 20 quid because they can't. They're going to get £10. So for that early part of the week, people are trying to spend less to get the maximum £10 discount. And I think we've heard that on various research that's come through anyway. So that's something that they've had to adapt the menus, that obviously the profit levels are better because they're not getting the high spend, they're getting the low spend. And they're not drinking. And people generally don't drink midweek in his restaurant anyway. They're not drinking. They're not going for they are the weekends. They're still having expensive wines at the weekends, but not midweek.
There are those that are cleverer than me on this eat out that have a starter in one restaurant, main course in another to get the discount price.
maximum benefit.
I'm just too lazy. I was too lazy to do that. I think just taking the point about service, I was in. I think it sounds as though I'm just going around all the bars of Edinburgh.
It does. Good on you. I'll follow you.
The first Edinburgh Glasgow rugby game took a table at the platform 5 opposite Haymarket Station, and there's a Belhaven pub, and it was very good. We had a table for 4 with a wee private TV to watch there. But what worked really well there was all the ordering was done on the app, and you didn't have to wait for somebody to come and take your order. You just order it on the app, and I thought this is going to take donkeys, but they were there within 3 or 4 minutes with your order. And what was even better was you just had to press reorder for the next round. And
presumably it was quite busy, wasn't it?
It was very busy, and the guys I was with, having watched Edinburgh Glasgow, decided, look how comfortable here. We'll just stay on and watch the next rugby game, Leinster Munster. So 5 hours later. We did have food in between times as well, so they did all right out of us.
So what was the reaction when the tries were, or the celebrations and everything? Did people maintain social distance?
Masks on.
There's tons of TV screens, and they weren't all on Premier Sports. So I would say because it was the same. The Celtic Dundee game was on at the same time. So it was more shouting that's something that, again, the week that Aberdeen closed down was the first weekend of the Premier League, as people will probably remember. And Aberdeen played Rangers. Celtic played the next day, which was Sunday. And we were around the Merchant City, and we walked past a well-known Irish bar in the Merchant City, and it was absolutely rammed. No social distancing at all. I mean, not even a foot. Rammed outside, inside, and of course there was 5 goals scored. And I think I've said before, I regard myself as a fairly disciplined bar manager. There's no way on earth you could have controlled that crowd in that bar. No. They were up, jumping around, hugging each other, kissing each other, high-fiving. And I walked past there and said to my wife, that's the worry. Because how do you control that? Whatever risk assessment, whatever you do there, you cannot take that emotion out of that game. And that's where maybe that's a consideration that the First Minister should be thinking about on those sort of matches, because you just simply cannot control that.
You're right, because I think what happened in one premises is the match was on and the volume was off and the chat was incredible. The noise in the room was incredible. So he went in and said, look, you got to stop shouting at each other, basically, stop with the noise. And it continued. So he broke the rules. He put the volume back on at a level that was okay from his point of view. And the volume, the shouting stopped because everybody started listening to the match. listening to the commentator. Yes, there was celebration, but in a very different way. And that was his way of controlling the room, was actually to put the volume back on. So we've given specific examples like that, where actually having background, having something to concentrate on, and sometimes to dilute it is really helpful. And that exact example has been given up. So I accept that wholeheartedly.
I was going to say, there's again another anomaly. You've got a pub full of sports people, like Gary was explaining, and if you try and limit that by a certain amount of numbers going in and no queuing outside and come back in 15 minutes, that's not going to work in that situation, because people are there for the game, so they're going to stay. They're not going to, if you can only have 40 people in your pub and everyone else, can wait to get in, they're going to be waiting for the entire duration of the game. They're going to have to go somewhere else because they're not going to, you're not going to get that through flow. Yeah.
As far as the Edinburgh-Glasgow game in Platform 5, you've got to remember, Gary, that it's Edinburgh, and they were very polite. It was just polite clapping when we scored tries.
I can imagine this.
Yeah, we did like that.
Yes.
We're very reserved in our emotions.
Jane, how are you finding it on the West Coast? Argyll.
Yes, well, in the village, I'm in Tarbert. It's been great. We have been so busy, as you can imagine. And this weekend we had our first event where we actually ran the Kintyre Way Ultra and Relay, which was really interesting. It was obviously an outdoor event and well spread across the land, so it was manageable. But it was great to see the village still so lively, and the pubs and the hotels and restaurants in use, which is great. I thought it was worth just me saying as well, Caroline, I work for a local authority, and one of the things, I totally agree with everything that you said around your communication with Scottish Government and how supportive and willing to listen they've been. That's been my experience as well. And I'm sure I'm not talking out of turn, but we did carry out a pandemic exercise this afternoon. I don't think I'm breaking any confidences to say that it was looking at what an outbreak would look like in a village. If it occurred in a school and had direct links to the hospitality industry, how would that be managed to really minimise the impact on the local economy, and how would you use advice and support versus enforcement? So I'm hoping that might give a wee bit of encouragement to some local authorities actually paying attention to how best to apply some of that. But really interesting to hear what you were saying, because it directly linked with some of the stuff we were doing today.
That's superb, isn't it? It's really, really interesting to hear. And I think, as I sort of said at the beginning, the relationships here are so vitally important. And although live events are coming back into outdoor areas, I'm saying to all the clients, your premises license is fine, your layout plan is there, I can give you all the licensing advice, but I can't go and speak to the environmental health officer unless you want me to. Go and speak to them and work out how you're going to manage noise, where the person's going to stand. The comedy duo that's going around the beer gardens, it's this particular. So that we're encouraging all of that face-to-face contact, get people down on site, go and do your risk assessment, put out a layout plan showing your 2 metre distancing, and you'll be fine, hopefully. And in other situations where you just can't negotiate. And they are now, I think I can think of 5 examples where we know that there'll be no negotiation. And funny enough, the person's not called an environmental health officer, she's called a public protection officer. So even that is slightly different, nuanced.
That changed since this?
I think it has, yes. I haven't looked all the way back at previous emails because I'm approaching the difficulty with a completely blank slate. I'm saying I don't know her, I don't know the publican, and I'm trying to basically mediate it to get a situation resolved. But that is very interesting that you've done that exercise and had a positive sort of output from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of things to think about, and lots of really that reliance on joint up working between industry, local authority, public health, to make sure that people are prepared and I think able to respond appropriately, because these things are going to happen.
Paul, you've got a lot of smaller clients. I'm conscious we're running out of time, but how are your clients? What are you hearing from them about what they're going through at the moment?
The general feedback and looking at the initial figures that are coming through, it's been quite encouraging, particularly given the fact that, as we've discussed, you just can't get the number of people through the door that you would have otherwise done. The figures have stacked up quite well in the initial stage. I suspect that some of that is just pent up need to get to the pub.
Desperate, yeah.
I think the challenge will be going forward now. The ETLT thing's finished. People are, back to school and accepting what have you. So I suspect there will be a slowing down now. The nights are drawing in, and then of course we've got the huge elephant in the room in terms of what's going to happen with unemployment in the fourth quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year, and that is clearly going to have a significant effect on spending power and what have you. So I really think this next 6 months is going to be a massive challenge. If we can get through to the spring of next year, and there's some light at the end of the tunnel, that would help. But what the casualty rate is going to be, God alone knows.
Well, on that note, Caroline, positives for the future. I don't want to go away thinking springtime is going to be miserable. I want to think of something positive. What can you see out there? What actually more specifically, what positives do you think operators have taken from this entire? Because it's not all negative. There are things that have changed and there are things that are changing for the better. So what can you see out there that's actually been a positive?
I think for some businesses, and I go back, 6 by Nico are going to continue if anybody's had that with their home delivery service, because actually that's worked really well for them. So some people have been able to, and I call it flex their business plan and adapt quickly. And I think that's definitely a positive because they've tried something, they've been pushed into trying it, but they've tried it and it's worked. So that's good. I think we've also seen, as I've referred to several times, the relationship piece is so important. But from the patron's point of view, the loyalty, that you're very, very loyal to certain premises, you're very, very loyal to certain brands and people and all that. So I think that's another positive, that people have been booking the hotel that they always go to, or the same B&B or whoever it is, to try and keep things afloat. I think there was quite a lot of paying it forward at the beginning. I certainly bought a lot of vouchers for different things, again, just to try and keep people ticking over. So kindness and loyalty and relationships, and businesses who were kind of fleet of foot and had the ability to flex. We were looking at whether perhaps group companies had suffered worse than the independents. And I can't answer that because every situation is so different and so personal. I think we've stepped up quickly, we've reacted quickly, we've proven that we can do it when we need to. And I think these are good things to look back on. I think indoor events coming back, hopefully by the 16th of September, that will again move things forward. Immediate positives I need to move forward, obviously, is the music situation to change, and I need appeal regulations put into these directions, etc. But partnership working for me has been a really good thing, and I think that has paid dividends for the clients that we represent. Interestingly, we've had a couple of queries just over the course of this week with people buying stately homes to run as wedding venues. So there is confidence there. People coming back from America, there's been 3 different sort of families who were in California who got out and are not returning and are now in Glasgow. So we're looking at different business plans with them, and obviously the rise of the internet again, and people using that as a business platform all the more. So that again for them is positive. They've had to leave, but they're turning that negative into something that works for them. So I suppose the human dynamism comes out, doesn't it, and people's ability to cope. So again, that's positive. Absolutely.
I mean, the CIS awards, the entries close tomorrow. As you know, the ones that we found most popular are the 3 new categories for collaboration, social and community, and innovation, and that's all to do with this period from March to July, and they're coming in 5 or 6 a day at the moment. They're absolutely amazing because people are getting together, they're working out that they're in a bit of a pickle, and the only way they're going to get out of it is through collaboration and through innovating and doing something for someone else, not just themselves. And it will, as you said earlier, it'll pay it forward. Caroline, thank you so much for today. It's been fascinating to find out what's going on in the licensing trade. Thank you to all for joining us. I know it's been a busy Zoom period for the last 4 months, and I appreciate you guys coming on to join us, because it is, it's one of those things. We're not going to get to many meetings. We're not going to go to London for one meeting necessarily anymore. So unfortunately, we're probably stuck with Zoom, but it can be really useful in these situations. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Cheers, Alex. Bye.
Bye.